It has been 1 week since the 2024 U.S. presidential election in which former President Trump, having left the White House in disgrace after his defeat in 2020, won his bid for re-election in what appears to be the election of the century, not just for the United States and her citizens, but for the entire world, as this historic political comeback has sent shockwaves across the globe in its wake. This is Underground, a political podcast born from the first-hand experience of the piloted Trump administration that aims to analyze how the next 4 years will usher humanity into the age of chaos as the world prepares itself for what could be the series finale of the atomic age. I'm your host, Mario, but you can call me Harbinger. Underground is not sponsored and never will be. A few months ago, when Biden stepped down and Harris looked to be the frontrunner for the Democratic Party, I confided this grim truth to a close friend of mine. Liberal Americans are long overdue for a reminder that the only thing this country hates more than black people is women. Kamala Harris, coming off of a pathetic performance in the 2020 Democratic primaries, followed by 4 years a mascot for the Biden administration, was seemingly popular enough to do what Hillary Clinton couldn't: become the first female president in this nation's history. Amid surging inflation, simmering global tension, and a nation more divided now than ever before, Harris and the Democrats were unable to connect with the working class and were soundly defeated. Political pundits are referring to this as the red shift, as both the United States and Europe have rubber-banded toward the right in the wake of the COVID pandemic, the war in Ukraine, and the powder keg in the Middle East. For full transparency, Underground intends to be a far-left voice in political commentary, and in case you haven't heard from enough sources on just how grave a second Trump administration is, allow me to paint the picture for you. The first Trump administration served as an experimental exercise for Donald Trump and the Republican Party. Trump was a businessman, not a politician. And even during early Republican primaries, he was seen as an extreme outlier. Even the Republicans didn't take his candidacy seriously. Upon taking office, he found that he just could not govern the way half of the country wanted him to, frequently hitting roadblocks, red tape, and legislative standstills.
And how did you know who to appoint?
Well, I didn't. I had no experience. You have to understand. Joe.
So
I was there 17 times in Washington, and I never stayed over. I wasn't a Washington guy. I was a New York guy. I was a New York builder, and I built buildings in New York, and I knew that whole world, but I didn't know the Washington world too well.
In spite of that, his first 4 years were so damaging that the effects of this administration will be felt for decades long after Trump is gone. But now it's the year 2024, and after handily putting meatball Ron DeSantis in his place, Trump made a desperate bid for re-election as his 34 felony counts were looking to have him put away for the rest of his remaining life. He now moves back into the White House with 4 years of political experience in the highest office of the land and an additional 4 years of preparation, groundwork, and an all-new hatred for the Democrats he feels is responsible for it all. Not only that, but when Trump took office in 2016, he essentially inherited the Romney Republicans, your father's conservatives, so to speak. In the wake of his first administration, many of those Republicans have come out against Donald Trump. A few of them even endorsing Kamala Harris, and some denouncing the party entirely. Mitt Romney seemed like an extreme right figure in 2012. By today's standards, Romney is now seen as a centrist who leans to the right. In the 4 years following Biden's win, Donald Trump began assembling a suicide squad of loyalists, successfully purging the Republican Party of any remaining sane conservatives and supercharging the MAGA virus in the process. He enters the White House not just in control of the Senate, but backed by a full squad of yes-men willing to do his bidding no matter the cost. In the grand political scheme of the job of POTUS, the second term is in a unique position wherein the president no longer has to worry about appealing to the masses in order to win re-election. This is why you commonly see a slew of pardons in the final months of a president's second term, as overall approval rating no longer matters. In this case, however, I believe we're going to see that wave of pardons come very early in the Trump administration, as he will likely pardon anyone that participated in the January 6th insurrection, and it will act as a grim foreshadowing of what is to come. This historic win only further cements the minds of those convinced that the 2020 election was stolen, entrenching them deeper into this cult than ever before. Furthermore, Project 2025, which acted as a Democratic boogeyman, has taken on an all-new frightening reality as the right seeks to isolate the country and purge the so-called enemies from within.
And then we have the enemy from within, And the enemy from within, in my opinion, is more dangerous than China, Russia, and all these countries.
That's us, the newly forced underground. And that's just here at home. Beyond our nation's border, tensions continue to rise all throughout Europe as Israel's war in Gaza continues to echo 1940s Germany. Zachor, remember, the well-known motto of the Israeli state in the wake of the Holocaust. In addition to that, there has now been a flurry of exchanges between Israel and Iran, and it puts the United States in a troubling position. Many far-left Democrats, such as myself, believe that the ongoing conflict is an ethnic cleansing, a genocide, and needs to be stopped. While the state of Palestine is not necessarily an enemy of the United States, Iran undoubtedly is. How then can we be expected to slow the fighting in Gaza while also swearing to fiercely defend Israel against Iran? Finish the job is the way Trump described it in a debate against Biden. A final solution to the war in Gaza. Zachor. Over in Ukraine, what seemed to be a never-ending conflict now appears to have Pyrrhic victory on the horizon for Russia, as Trump has been accused of being aided by Russia as far back as 2016, with Trump also claiming he could end the war in Ukraine in one day. As most of these arenas usually are, this is a very complex and diverse topic that I could honestly spend the entire episode on. Because I'd like to cater to a wider audience, I'll sum it up as best as I can. To refresh your memory, Trump's very first impeachment, remember he was impeached twice, listed obstruction of Congress, as he infamously withheld military aid from Ukraine in secret unless they agreed to announce an investigation into his upcoming political opponent, Joe Biden. I need you all to know that this was a complete fabrication. For what purpose, I'm sure historians and Trump supporters will spend years arguing over. The prevailing theory appears to be that he ultimately wanted to promote the theory that Ukraine was behind 2016 election interference, not Russia. Ukraine valiantly chose to continue to put her innocent citizens in existential danger and did not comply. Their assistance package was frozen in secret July of 2019 before finally being released on fucking September 11th. Granted, Ukraine wasn't formally invaded until 2022. At the time, it was fighting in the eastern region that started in 2014. And as a side note, without going too far down this rabbit hole, it's really important to remember that when we talk about aid packages to Ukraine, much of it is just going straight to US-based weapons manufacturers. Misinformation has tragically convinced half of our country that the US Treasury is just hitting Zelensky up on Cash App and transferring $250 million to spend as he sees fit. In reality, the US military has seized a strategic opportunity to rid itself of old, outdated equipment that already costs millions simply for storage, upkeep, and disposal. The reason true Republicans and Democrats alike get so supportive of this rapid removal of excess is because our nation's number one enemy is being hit with equipment that was new to the US decades ago, and it's having more significant impacts than we could have ever expected. We are trimming the fat of our nation's military to make room for more modern equipment, and it is crippling the Russian military in the process. Cold, heartless reality is that it is in our best interest to ensure that this war go on for as long as possible, and we continue to fund Ukraine for as long as possible. If the meat grinder never stops, Russia will never stand a chance against the full force of the modern US military. But the economy's stupid. Back to the current day, and Trump is president-elect. You better believe he remembers. Donald Trump Jr. shared a post on social media mocking Ukraine, calling it their allowance, that their allowance is coming to an end. Imagine that. Donald Trump Jr. making jokes about allowances. You'd almost forget that innocents are being killed. In my own opinion, I believe the writing on the wall is clear. Soon, all aid to Ukraine will cease. Remember earlier when I said the Republican Party was purged by MAGA loyalists? Mitch McConnell, vile as he is, famously recognized and supported the need to come to Ukraine's defense. As of this publication, McConnell has stepped down as Senate Majority Leader. I predict that within the first 6 months of the second Trump administration, Russia, with its refurbished army of North Korean porn addicts, will take Kiev, and Zelensky will either be assassinated or jailed and die of not-so-natural causes the way Alexei Navalny did. I hope I'm wrong. Glory to Ukraine. In the South China Sea, tensions continue bubbling as China continues its military exercises in and around Taiwan, preparing for its goal of ultimate reunification with the island country that has found itself surrounded on all sides by enemies and allies alike. This has commanded much more attention from the United States and her military as we find ourselves being logistically pulled in two different directions across the globe. As a result, the very fate of NATO hangs in the balance as a right-wing United States continues to pressure Europe to meet the minimum 2% spending target agreed upon by all its NATO members. It is important to note that assuming a U.S. withdrawal from NATO, many European countries find themselves woefully unprepared to face a battered yet reinforced Russian army. Over on the 38th parallel, relations between North and South Korea, who mind you are still technically officially at war, have fallen to an all-time low as Kim Jong-un continues to test long-range ICBMs and has begun preparing the North Korean border for a South Korean advance by destroying roads, building anti-tank barriers, and laying mines all across the southern portion of North Korea. All of this is underscored by continued growing relations between Russia, Iran, China, and North Korea. It has only been 1 week. In that time, Black Americans across the United States have been the target of mass text messages telling them they've been selected for cotton picking or to be ready to become a slave. Your Body, My Choice videos have begun spreading across TikTok as young white Trump supporters openly mock women's rights and taunt them, knowing abortion is now on the chopping block. As a result, many American women are promoting South Korea's infamous 4B movement. Women in South Korea have become so disillusioned with their place in South Korean society that they have chosen to say no to dating men, sleeping with men, having children, and marrying men, also referred to as the 4 No's. The Hispanic community is also in an all-out civil war with itself as Trump miraculously made huge gains among Latino men in spite of openly racist comments regarding Puerto Ricans and promises to deport 1 million immigrants per year. This last fact hits a little close to home for me. I am first-generation Mexican. I have met and known several Latinos who openly support Trump despite currently being illegal or having been illegal at one point. And it's something that the Latino community doesn't talk about enough. The elephant in the room or the dirt swept underneath the rug, depending on how you choose to see it, I've noticed that there seems to be this attitude of slamming the door behind them, a fuck you, got mine viewpoint, where actual immigrants feel empowered to prevent others from walking the same path to success that they did. My father, an illegal immigrant, now proud citizen, described it to me when I was just 13 years old, using the crabs in the bucket metaphor. Now, if you haven't heard this, basically, there is a crab catcher catching crabs and sorting them into 2 buckets. One bucket has a lid and the other one doesn't. Someone comes along and asks the crab catcher, "Why do you only cover one of the buckets?" The man responds, "The ones in this bucket are Chinese crabs, and I need to cover this one because they'll all come together and support another in attempts to escape. These uncovered ones, those are Mexican crabs. They don't need to be covered because if one tries to escape, the rest will yank him right back down." And here's a hot take for you. Back when Trump said Mexico isn't sending their best, he was absolutely correct. My father did it the infamous way. He hopped the border, paid the coyotes, and came in on foot. 90% of the men that were a part of his group were straight up criminals, frequent flyers, people who have been deported more than once with criminal records and ill intent. I remember being so surprised by this account because his route was honest. He dropped out of school and drove a truck in order to save up for the cost of making it out here. When Reagan gave amnesty to millions of illegals, including my father, a move that the so-called greatest Republican ever would likely be ripped to shreds for in today's political climate, what he actually did was secure an entire generation of deeply religious, old-fashioned Mexicans for the Republicans. 90% of Mexico self-identifies as Catholic, and you better believe that just like here in the US, religion is often the dividing line between voting Democrat or Republican. In an ironic twist of fate, Latino support for Trump could also be traced back to Reagan, as he planted seeds that Trump is currently reaping, and he's certainly something of a reaper, as many naturalized citizens find themselves in positions of risk to lose their citizenship and get deported. But those aren't the only faces that the leopards are salivating at. Trump garnered a massive wave of support from Arab Americans who could not bring themselves to vote for Harris due to her stance on the Israel-Palestine conflict. They were fed the beautiful lie that Trump will bring peace to the region. And I concur. I do believe Trump will bring peace to the region in the form of a completely wiped out Palestine. The Gaza Strip will be turned to glass, and this genocide will be nothing more than a footnote in an outdated world history textbook at the bottom of a landfill somewhere in Florida. Trump also secured the votes of white women, Taylor Swift be damned, further dividing a nation struggling to keep itself from all-out civil war. In her concession speech, Kamala Harris gracefully thanked the country, reminding everyone that it is only during the darkest of nights that stars shine the brightest, the light of optimism, of faith, of truth, and service. After Reagan's second victory, he famously announced that it is morning in America, as Reaganomics successfully stimulated the economy for the moment. Now that Trump is sent for a second term, the United States ushers in what could be the darkest period in its history. Next episode, we will dive deeper into the failed Harris campaign, but until then, I am Harbinger. Welcome to the Dusk.